Cool. So this is me. I guess we'll do this. Finish up for the night, and it'll be fun. So interview with Iris Marion Young. Originally, the idea of interviewing Iris Marion Young in Barcelona came after she accepted an invitation to give a public lecture at the Law School of Pompeu Fabra University in May 2002. I had first met Iris back in 1999 at a conference in Bristol, England, and I was impressed deeply by her personality and ideas. We kept in touch and since then exchanged papers and ideas. She was very keen to come to Spain. It seems that her mother had lived some years in Mallorca, and she finally traveled to Barcelona with her husband and daughter in spring of '02. What year is this? So, the lecture, which she entitled Women, War, and Peace, was meant to be the closing session of a course on gender and the law, and was also part of a series of seminars annually organized by the Legal Philosophy Department, the Albert Casamigla Seminar. Her work was quite well known among several Catalan philosophers and political scientists, and Professor Ángel Castañeda, who at the time was director of Ideas, a Catalan journal published by the Centre de Estudios de Temes Contemporáneos, Center for the Study of Contemporary Issues, suggested that she could give a second lecture, which they would publish together with an interview I could prepare. She accepted both proposals, and I started to think of a questionnaire for the interview while I was at Queen's University in Canada earlier that year. Idil, Boran, a philosopher and a good friend who did her doctorate at Queen's, offered to help me with this endeavor, since she also admired Iris as both a scholar and a person. Together we prepared questions and sent them to her once she was back in Chicago, as there was not time to conduct the interview in person while she was in Barcelona. In fall of 2002, she sent some answers to our questions, but the document was unfortunately incomplete. She was busy at the time, so we didn't want to pressure her to finish the interview. Eventually, the editors of Ideas decided to publish the manifest about the war in Iraq, subscribed by a large number of American intellectuals, together with fragments of Iris's anti-war lectures and an article that she wrote together with Daniel Archibughi, envisioning a global rule of law. The interview was thus left unpublished. Both Idil and I thought it would be worthwhile to publish it somewhere else, but for one reason or another, Iris didn't have the time to complete it, and we kept postponing the project. At some point, she said that the questions she left unanswered were too complex or too challenging to give a short or quick answer, and that she would need to reflect on them to provide detailed responses. Later, we learned she was ill, and we didn't feel it was right to insist on those questions being answered. The issue came up again when she accepted to participate as a keynote speaker at the World Congress of Legal Philosophy held in Granada in June 2005. She then said she would come first to Barcelona, where she and Nancy Fraser had been invited to a workshop by the Catalan Women Institute, and suggested we could sit in a cafe to talk about the issues left out in those unanswered questions. Unfortunately, she had to cancel this trip because of her medical treatment, and I did not have the privilege of sharing time with her again. The following series of questions and responses are the product of this rather extended interview process. Okay, so this is like some wacky timeline of when they actually spoke to Iris Marion Young, who is a well-known philosopher. Okay, and this is from 2008. I did not realize that. I don't know why this is on the front page, but this must have just been uploaded to Phil Papers. So this is interesting. We're getting an old interview from 2008, which at this point feels like a million billion years ago. All right. So NT and IB are the interviewers, and IMY, I guess, is Iris Marion Young. NT and IB. Looking at your background, we see that you earned a PhD in philosophy from Penn State University in 1974. Your dissertation was on Wittgenstein's philosophy of language and social philosophy. How did you become interested in political philosophy and feminist theory? Are there special events or influences that motivated this shift in interests? Iris says, I was always interested in political philosophy. My dissertation thinks about language in relation to social practice. While not directly political philosophy, nevertheless it laid a foundation for concerns I have always had about communication, intersubjectivity, and politics. It was while I was working on my dissertation that I first encountered the work of Habermas and his colleague Appel on communicative interaction, which was not yet very well known in the United States. Their ideas were influenced by interpretation of Wittgenstein, and soon after finishing the dissertation I began studying Habermas more closely and eventually published on Habermas. It is true, though, that a personal interest in activist politics did not begin to occupy my life until after graduate school. Like many women of my generation, the women's movement of the 70s became a very important vehicle for self-reflection, which also influenced fundamentally the way I began to approach philosophy and political theory. The Society for Women in Philosophy, SWIP, was founded in the United States in the early 70s, and for many years it was the professional organization I most identified with, partly because it was also a political and social organization. We had intense weekend meetings twice a year where we were inventing feminist philosophy, and then we had evening parties. SWIP was an important training ground for me, the first place I presented papers, and where I experienced intense inquiry in the mode of ideas that were truly breaking new ground. It's interesting. There's SWIP here in New York. Like, there's SWIP Talks still. So SWIP is still around. And so the Society for Women in Philosophy is still going in various areas. I don't know globally much about it, but there are talks in the New York City area that have been put on by, like, SWIP. So, IB. How was it to be a woman student, young academic in the 60s and 70s in American universities? What were the challenges you think younger generations don't have to face now? Conversely, what are, in your view, new challenges your generation didn't have to face? Young answers. I think that the women's movement happened partly because college-age women of my generation experienced some contradictions. On the one hand, we were raised as children to believe that anything was possible for us. We had equal education. Many of us came from families that did not distinguish their expectations they had for achievement for their daughters from those of their sons, and so on. Then when we arrived at college, we discovered two things: that many of the men our age thought of us mostly as potential sex partners rather than colleagues, and that our teachers and other older persons did have strong ideas about women's lesser competence to do important things of the world. Both attitudes made us angry. Both have declined in their overtness, I think, in the experience of young women today. Yet some of the most basic aspects of gender distinction and oppression remain, I think. There remain a very strong gender division of labor in all societies that continues to expect that care work will be performed primarily by women, much or all of it unpaid in the home, and that housework will be done primarily by women. These expectations and assumptions continue to make life easier for a lot of men than a lot of women who also wish or need to do work outside the home. Academic life, professional life, the structure of the world of paid work more generally has hardly begun to address this problem, and still has not. Alright, question. Successful women academics like yourself are role models to many young women academics and university students. Did you have women role models? Were there particular women during your formation as a political theorist that had an important influence that shaped your career? Answer. Women of my age didn't have many role models. I remember reading some of Hannah Arendt's texts when I was in graduate school looking for a hint of what it might mean to do political theory as a woman. She offers few hints. I dreamed about the life of Simone de Beauvoir. I did, though, have a woman professor as an undergraduate who was very important for me, Edith Weiskograd, now well known for her work on Levinas, among other things. Edith took me under her wing when I was ready to go to graduate school in philosophy and advised me on where to apply and where not to apply because she thought they would not be good for a woman. And she also made a point to promote me to some of the more powerful men in my department at Queen's College so that they would write letters of recommendation for me. She did this without my asking, and indeed I would not have asked, I think. I am very grateful to her. Question. If our information is correct, you were born in New York. Do you think that growing up in such a distinctive American city has influenced your thoughts, maybe even your open criticism towards the Bush administration reaction after September 11th? Young says, I spent most of my growing up years in New York and went to college in New York. Doing so made me an unrepentant city girl. The image of city life I try to evoke in the last chapter of Justice and the Politics of Difference is my experience of New York, as well as other North American cities, Chicago for example. I love the bustle of city life. I love the rhythm of the streets with tall buildings around them. I don't think that growing up in New York is a source of orientations in social and political criticism, however. Many conservatives grow up in cities and many progressives grow up in small towns or in the country. Question. Much of your work in political philosophy stems from the view that ideals of universal citizenship and impartiality are seriously biased in gestures towards what you call a politics of difference. At the same time, against more relativist and recent pessimistic views about an unenviable clash of values in multicultural societies at the turn of the 21st century, your work, especially your last book, Inclusion and Democracy, suggests a deep commitment on the possibility of human understanding and communication. Does this accurately reflect your intuitive conviction about human possibilities? It is interesting because I don't know if you how many people would say there's a deep commitment to human understanding at the moment. We're seemingly going farther away from explaining anything to anybody. Young says, I guess I agree with Charles Dickens. Every time is both the best times and the worst of times. The degree of selfishness, cruelty, indifference, and incompetence of which humans are individually and especially collectively capable, and which we regularly exhibit, is mind-boggling. At the same time, acts and movements of hope and courage keep popping up. Many young people today whom I encounter in the US and elsewhere are full of hope and determination to make the world a bit better. You have to meet the Zoomers. They are full of dread and doom. I am sure that you encounter a similar young people. We have to nurture such hope and determination, it seems to me. Yeah, we have to do a better job at the moment because between millennials like myself, I'm an older millennial, and everyone younger, it does not look like things are going well at the moment. So I wouldn't, this optimism that is being expressed in 2008, right before the housing crash, yeah, because you have to remember, what did I grow up with? I grew up during the first Gulf War, the first economic boom of the internet and the crash, September 11th, the second, the housing crash, and yeah, and then like the pandemic, more fuckery from all this stuff. So it's like the optimism that may have existed earlier, not even that many years ago, is not looking so is looking less plausible to the current younger generations. Hey JT, yeah, we've seen, I mean, people joke, we've seen like 5 century sized floods, like, you know, so 100-year floods, but we've seen 5 of them at this point. So yeah, and welcome in if you have any questions. We read this interesting article which was a sort of a more popular piece written by a philosopher on orphanhood, and now I just was like, let's do something else fun. And there's an interview with Iris Young, who's an important feminist philosopher, and this is from 2008. This these responses. About communication, it seems important to me to affirm that social differences in class, culture, language, religion, gender, sexuality, age, and so on do not imply that people differently positioned with differing histories cannot understand each other. All cultures are hybrid in the sense that they have always communicated with, borrowed from, and transformed themselves in relation to others. Oh, well, thank you, JT. Similarly, political coalition or transformation in gender relations imply that people of different classes or sexes often communicate their perspectives on social life to one another that produce transformed and enlarged selves. Again, given the structure of our recent discourse, at least here in America, this may be a harder position to take nowadays. Question. It seems clear that standard conceptions of family values, marriage, and procreation perpetuate women's oppression and subordination. You have done interesting critical work on standard family values along these lines. For these reasons, some feminists suggest that women should be able to make a free choice of an alternative lifestyle, such as to willingly choose to be a single mother, to choose a female partner, not having children, or possible combinations of these. But how to make these alternative options more feasible, and what can be done to ensure equality in heterosexual marriages. Again, another thing that, like, basically this sort of question, it might be asked but not in this way right here. Like, choose a female partner. Oh my god, in 2008 that was still a question, but like this, it wouldn't, if anything, it just wouldn't be phrased this way. Young answers. The alternative options you mention are already being chosen by a large number of women, not only in the United States, but also in many parts of the world. The problem is not to make the choices possible, because they are already being made already, but to change social structures and attitudes so that women who make such choices do not suffer disadvantage because of them. That requires some legal changes to make same-sex partnerships legally protected, which we have now, but God knows for how long, as well as changes in workplace norms and general societal attitudes that privilege heterosexual two-parent families. Yeah, so I think this is one of the things that we get with the different pronouns. This is actually one of the things that actually is helping with, because if the law recognizes multiple pronouns, then it has to inherently protect these alternative partnerships. As opposed to same sex, you can have differently gendered partnerships, and then it would get legal protections. Although in America, I'm not sure how long that's going to last, given our current government. Question. At first sight, the transformations in the social ethos in Western societies are reassuring regarding women's equality. Women are more assertive, have access to education, and can expect to work in environments that are not openly threatening or hostile. Sexual harassment at work is less tolerated, and professions and offices that were close to women in the past are now realistic options. To the optimist, we don't even need feminism anymore. But if we look closely, we see that things are not as encouraging. It is still more difficult for women to combine family and professional career. Women's salaries on average are still lower than are those of their male counterparts in democratic societies. Furthermore, violence and prejudice against women doesn't seem to be decreasing. Across the United States, courts are prosecuting mothers saying they should have known their partners were going to harm their children. And of course, most of the violence against women that ranges from rape to murder happens not so much by random strangers, but mostly at home or by males whom they know. How could you explain the persistence of these problematic trends despite the huge efforts of feminist activism and the successes in other fields? What a huge question, and she answers. In brief, don't you think that it's about the maintenance of a distinction between public and private? The positive changes that have happened for women in many societies in the last 30 years relate largely to the public presence, more job and occupational opportunity, more presence and acceptance in politics and civil activity, more attention to women in the arts. But as you point out, what seems not to have changed very much is the norms and oppressions that are more private. Women still do most of the housework, childcare, care for elderly family members. Even though many countries have put good laws and services in place to help women who are victims of violence in the form of rape or battery, the incidence of such violence has not declined in most places, and in some has increased. The social practices and attitudes remain strong that men do not need to do the private unpaid care work, and that they need not be subject to punishment or very much punishment when they physically or psychically dominate individual women. Much work remains to be done to undermine this public-private assumption. Yeah, and this sort of distinction is huge also with tech now, because tech allows for people to make certain things public that were private and private that were public. You can hide different things. I can't even tell you. I'm part of a Discord that is so that's just a chat and message board program for those who don't know what Discord is, but it's part of a program that has to do with streaming. And it's like this, craziness is going on the Discord because there's a problem between the different maintainers of the project, and things that get made public, things that are private, and the abuse some of the people are taking and like inflicting on others. It's so the tech is just exacerbating this problem. It has not made it better. It has very much exacerbated this public-private distinction. And people with the social media and people are getting bullied through their different programs. This is just basically, it's hard. Okay, question. Having experience in many university environments in different parts of the world, we see that the word feminist still evokes in many people's minds a negative image. In fact, many young women are reluctant to describe themselves as feminists. A male friend and colleague reported having been in situations at university in Canada in which he found himself defending feminist causes to his women's studies, to their astonishment, who, he says, were reluctant to be associated with feminism. I found myself defending feminism, he reports, and they were trying to convince me why that's a bad idea. It was almost paradoxical. Why do you think some women are reluctant to describe themselves as feminists, and should we be concerned about it? Young answers, what's in a name? I don't see any reason to defend the term feminism. What matters is the political objectives of more freedom and equality for women. It is better to be concrete about the particular harms and inequalities too many women suffer that are the result of unjust social rules and practices, as well as from attitudes of indifference or misogyny. Many people who reject the label feminist will admit that there are injustices towards women when particular details are offered to them. That's what matters. Yeah, I mean, there's a sociology there. Like, there's different groups of feminists, and so some of them made a big name for themselves, and you might not like that particular group, but you still might like a lot of the causes that they were addressing. Question. And now a question about men defending or teaching feminism. Although many people would agree that men can be feminist, the idea of a male feminist still doesn't resonate well in many people's minds. In your view, what is the role of men in the feminist movement? Young answers. I recently had a conversation with a man in Sweden who is doing research on how firefighters understand their jobs and how their understanding may not cohere entirely with the heroic image of the firefighter as physically strong and simply a risk taker. He is concerned to demonstrate that the job of firefighter entails a lot of caring work towards people who are frightened and hurt and who may have lost loved ones. His motive for this research is partly feminist. He wants to prove that there ought to be more women firefighters. This is just one example of the kind of work that men can do as feminists. It's not only intellectual work. My husband works for a child care advocacy group. He is a feminist and he thinks that only if there is more quality, affordable child care will both women and men and their children have better lives. One role for men in feminism is to demonstrate that many of the goals of feminism can make life better for men as well as women. Question. Looking at your CV, it seems that you've been very busy writing, researching, and lecturing during the 90s, but you've also done a lot of activist work. Do you still believe that ideas can change the world, and how do you see the relationship between academic theory and political advocacy? Young says, no, I never thought that ideas themselves can change the world. People change the world. People organize in particular ways that confront and transform relations of power. Ideas are often tools in such struggles, but ideas themselves don't change the world. So I don't see political activism or policy as any kind of application of theory. Political action should be informed with a lot of knowledge of the world, but the sort of knowledge that is often most useful is facts, what's going on, who supports what kind of issues, how some policy was made and why, and so on. I think of academic theory as a reflective activity that draws away from political action to think about a larger picture than one usually has in the tactical moment of a political action or campaign. In fact, I think of political action and the ideas of activists as more a resource for critical theory than theory is for political action. The reflective accounts of theory, though, can be useful to political actors in developing critical analyses and also in understanding the significance of what they have been doing. See, that's interesting. So basically, she's saying it's more one-sided because, what I think is right here is that you're going to get a lot of feedback when you actually try to push against the system, and you're going to see what push works and where you're getting pushback from. So that is going to get you a lot more interesting information when you're doing, reflecting than merely reflecting. You might not realize you're going to get so much pushback from certain areas versus what might actually work. You have to actually go out and push to find out. So, yeah, that's a good point. Excuse me. Question, what are you working on now? Young says, as always, I have many projects going. One I am particularly excited about right now. Some years ago, I wrote a series of essays using ideas of phenomenology and other ideas from French philosophy, in particular, such as those of Irigaray and Kristeva, to theorize various aspects of female body experience, movement, pregnancy, and the experience of clothes, the experience of being breasted. These were collected with some other essays in a book called Throwing Like a Girl and Other Essays in Feminist Philosophy and Social Theory. That book went out of print a few years ago. I have an agreement with Oxford University Press to put those essays out in a new book, together with some more recent essays, such as House and Home, Feminist Variations on a Theme, and some as yet unwritten essays, including one that argues that the category of lived body is better than that of gender for reflections in feminist theory. I think this has actually come to pass where people do talk about lived body more than gender, although gender has gotten very big, but people I think do talk about lived body right there. On a completely different note, I have also begun a book-length project on the subject of political responsibility. The question is, what are the responsibilities of individuals in relation to structural social injustices? To answer this question, I am developing a concept of a political responsibility which is distinct from blame or fault. I've written one essay in this project that asks what are the responsibilities of institutions and consumers in affluent European and North American societies in relation to sweatshop working conditions in faraway countries where workers produce some of the goods the Europeans and North Americans, consume. And this is a quote, it looks like, from the editor. Marion Young has now provided answers to several questions originally posed in the interview. These questions follow up on themes raised in the preceding conversation, expand expanding it to include pressing contemporary political issues. They also show the direction of the interview had there been an opportunity to continue to its completion, and where, as Ira said, more thought and extended discussion was needed. With the hope that this conversation will continue, though now sadly in her absence, we include these unanswered questions here. Oh, so these are just the questions that she could not get around to. Okay, so this is interesting too. So the interview got cut off here for whatever reason. Just random reasons. They said earlier that she was sick and they couldn't get a hold of her or whatever it was, and they couldn't get answers. So yeah, they're questions, but they're not like super, like you need to see the answers. Okay, so do you guys have any questions about just this sort of this was a question and answer with an important feminist philosopher, Iris Young. I guess she died. I don't quite know her history, but yeah. But like that's what happened. The interview could not be continued after a certain point. Okay. Yeah. I guess that would be all for tonight. I don't know if this is interesting, like just to see that what was going on almost 20 years ago now. She died of cancer in 2006. Thanks, Valpo. Glutendorf, oh hey, what's up? Isn't it kind of pre-Socratic to almost engage in feminist ideology? What do you mean by pre-Socratic? Like, why would it be before Socrates? So it's just interesting. I mean, you can see there's a little bit of the old flavor, like I said, and JT commented too. Like people from our generation and younger, maybe, and maybe even the generation up above me. We've seen like she's from the like previous generations. Our world is a bit different at this point. Things have not gone the way people thought it would have, and so it's a little harder to have the optimism about things. Glutendorf says, just since the basis is an absolute yet generalized difference in experience between man and woman, it's a kind of basic fallacy. No, I don't think it is. And it's not. I don't think it's a basic fallacy. And I'll point out why. Where was the thing about the embodiment? Okay, so there's something about the embodiment here. This throwing like a girl and other essays in feminist and social theory. This thing where they were talking about what it is to have like a different shaped body. It makes a big difference actually. So there is difference in society, just how the body is treated. And like for example, not even that long ago, they were sending up an all-female crew to the space station, and they were going to have the first all-female spacewalk. And when they got up there, they realized none of the spacesuits fit any of the women. So they couldn't have an all-female spacewalk because the suits were never designed with like hips in a slightly different location. The shoulders, like the chest, it didn't fit. And so the whole concept of what it meant to be an astronaut didn't actually work for the female body. And so it's not so clear that like in certain areas, it really does matter that you have a differently shaped body. Your body works differently. And so it's not so clear that there, of course, for certain things, like if you want to argue about abstract ideas, women can do that just fine. And it's basically the same between all people. But there's other parts of philosophy where it actually does matter that we are shaped differently. And that's important. That like you can't just assume like all the bodies work the same. Where's that phenomenology point? She said so. Was that here? Yeah, various aspects of the female body experience. So it's like, right, it's this thing. How'd I do that? Okay, yeah, so this is a little wonky right here. Glutendorf says, okay, but they could make female spacesuits. And the question of how it came to be that most jobs were male dominated seems like a social science question and not much a philosophy question to you. Yeah, it's historically it's definitely a question of history and what happened, but there's a lot to it actually. And of course, they have made female spacesuits now, and there have been female spacewalks. Um, but there's more to it. Like, it's not just like everyone has different bodies, but like, pregnancy is a hard topic if you want to talk about what is going on in a human body, and this becomes a big deal, of course, in terms of the law. Who has rights to like the fetus and things like that? Is it an unborn human? Is it a fetus? Is it something else? So these things have massive implications for society, actually. And so you might say, well, that's just a legal thing. Well, not everyone thinks it's just a legal thing. It has a massive implications in society and healthcare, and and who gets what kind of healthcare, and who has to report things to like what agency at that point. And so it becomes rather complicated if you once you talk about the differences between male and female bodies. It isn't so simple just to say, oh, we can make different spacesuits, or it's a technological solution. It's not so clear that it's not just that, like, the hips are in a different place, or like they have one more rib. It's these sorts of things have massive implications because of, just like healthcare does not work the same for between men and women. Women are not treated the same, like the way they report injury and things like that. You don't think it's just a legal thing, aborting? It's like a kind of spiritual question that I don't think society will be ready for a long time. Well, fine, but then it would be a philosophical question that people can investigate, and we might not have a good answer for a long time. Now, yeah, I got you on Glutendorf. Like, so that's the thing. We're not going to have answers, and so the idea that, like, people are investigating this in this way is a topic of philosophy. So it's just, sometimes I agree that there's certain parts of philosophy that might not have anything to do with, male or female or whatever. Other parts, once you start getting into the actual issues, like if you really are trying to get into the issues of like life, like, and that's a normal philosophy topic, then you might have to get into the different bodies. And that would be something that, people with different bodies have something to say about. But I mean, if you're talking about, I don't know, philosophy and mathematics, I can't see how there's any difference between who's talking about it in the philosophy of mathematics. Yeah, I mean, of course we're all part of the same bunch of matter, and that the eventual conclusion of the debate as well. I don't know what the conclusion of the gender debate is. That seems kind of reductionist to say we're all the same kind of matter. Everything is all the same matter and doesn't all reduce down to nothing. I mean, unless you're a monist, you're going to say everything's all one. And that's a fine position in philosophy, but that's not going to solve anything in the short term. I mean, we're all going to like disappear in the Big Bang, sure. I mean, the Big Crunch. In the end, we're all going to turn into dust. But that doesn't... I mean, you can't expect people to accept that when they're trying to change the world now. So... that's I think what's the answer to that? It's sort of like putting that we're all made out of the same stuff. Yeah, of course we're all made out of the same stuff, but that's not what matters. What matters is, what are we going to do about it? And so of course we're all made out of the same stuff, but like, what are we going to do about how we're put together differently is what matters. In some sense, like, of course we're all made of the same physics, we all have like similar minds, but like it's not exactly the same, and these things make a big difference. Like, people are killing each other for all sorts of reasons all over the world right now, and like, of course, like, why are we doing that? We need answers. We need to try to stop people from killing each other all over the place for terrible reasons. And like, do we have laws that treat women's bodies different than males' bodies? And so it's like, these things, we're not going to get an answer by saying we're all sort of by reducing us all down to the same stuff. We have more stuff going on with us, and we don't have answers to that. So So, well, yeah, what right action is when we're all sharing the same identity of constituents of one totality is what most religions try to answer. Yeah. And so you can, of course, take the religious tack and just go with whatever the religion says, but that's not going to work for all the people. Some people like certain religions and those answers. Other people don't. And people are trying to investigate stuff. Oh, yeah, and I agree with you. We are not going to answer the question, but I'm not going to tell people that they can't look at this in different ways and try to figure new ideas out. And that's basically my position, is that you can't come at these people who are trying to study this in this way and say they're not getting anywhere. It's like, we don't know if they're getting anywhere yet. That's why they investigate. Now, we can look back at like certain philosophies in the past and be like, yeah, they didn't get anywhere. But it's unfair to the people doing the research now, where they think they're getting somewhere, and we're not like experts in this. It's like, yeah, well, maybe it is a good idea. And like I said, I think some of this stuff, I mean, you have to go look at what they say. You do. And why do they like it so much? And I mean, maybe they are jackasses and they should be forgotten, or they will have actually something to say, and then they should be lauded for, coming up with new good ideas. So, but it's like, yeah, are we going to answer the question yet? No. Are we making progress? Maybe. But it's a question. It's like, this is the good question we got to ask. Is this worth spending more time at? And people think so. At least some people do. And then people argue about it. You also don't want to tell people that, like, they can't go, like, ask a question. It's like, if I told you you couldn't, like, you're not, like, you don't know enough to ask a question, it's like, well, go screw yourself. I can go ask. I may not know a whole lot, but if, like, I want to be interested in something and I want to go find out, you know what? Go be interested, go find out. Like, go investigate. As the author was saying here, political stuff, you learn a lot more by going to actually trying to change the system than you do by just trying to theorize it, because you're going to find out who pushes back and where you get pushed back from, and that's much more useful than trying to reflect upon it, because reflection's good, but you don't always know what's going to happen in the real world. Yeah, let's see. Where would she say that? Yeah, the public-private assumption. This is a very good point. That much work remains to undermine the public-private assumption that what is going on in private is you still can get away with. Well, Glutendorf, you're saying we can't ask the question, but we're not going to get to that part. But then we can't ask the question because we're not getting there yet. See, that's the question here. How do you know we're not at that understanding yet? Maybe some of us are. Maybe they're a lot smarter than you or me, and some people actually do know what to do about this, and we are just not, like you and me. What's up, Victor Sor? Like, maybe you and me are not there yet, but maybe someone is. Yeah, but that's the question. If they want to go investigate and you're saying, well, you're not getting anywhere, so how do you know they're not getting anywhere? Maybe they are on the right track, and maybe we don't, or they're not going to solve it, but maybe they are farther along the path than we are. And so you got to, like, give people space to look stuff up. You got to give people space to do research, because there are always people that, that are, ahead of the curve. Like Einstein was ahead of the curve. If people said, we can't ask the questions you're asking, Einstein, he'd be like, well, screw you. I already worked it out. Here's the answer. It's like, well, maybe some people have gotten some results, and we're just waiting to figure it out. And that's sort of the way it is. People make progress, and then the rest of us have to, like, figure out what they have said afterwards. There's a quote on, like, what it is to be a great philosopher. The better the more important the philosopher, the more explaining we have to do after they die. because we can't understand what happened. And like they were that far ahead of us that like for generations after, we're still trying to explain what they meant. And so, Aristotle, Plato, we're still trying to explain what they meant 2,000 years later. And so some of these people, we may be in that situation. They may have already gotten to spots that the rest of us will take a very long time to figure out. And that's the nature of philosophy. Like sociologically speaking, like people we think are these great philosophers are the ones that we keep reading because we still find new ideas in them, like new thoughts that the rest of us didn't have. And so have we not gotten to the spot yet? No, we might not have, they might have. So this is why I'm actually very, very permissive about philosophy. You have to have a little bit of humility on what you think we can and can't do.